Vietnam a Category 1 ranking, paving the way for non-stop travel between the two countries. Trump says the DPRK can follow in the steps of Vietnam, a country once locked in conflict with the U.S., but which has now become a thriving trade partner. Chuck Tintas, CGTN.
After 2 weeks of preparation, the summit is finally set to begin Wednesday. And for the latest on Kim's agenda, our correspondent Han Peng has this from downtown Hanoi.
Because there's been no official announcement from the DPRK of what Kim is doing here in Hanoi on Wednesday, there's a lot of media speculation about what he is doing and where he is. It turned out that we just received information from the DPRK media that Kim Jong Un has been staying inside his own hotel, hearing report from the DPRK delegation on the latest negotiation with the Americans on denuclearization issues. But the afternoon schedule is still empty for Kim Jong Un before he will meet with US President Donald Trump this evening here in Hanoi. There's been a lot of guessing, not only in the media, but also on local people about where he might be traveling to, because last time in Singapore, Kim Jong Un did visit some landmark locations before meeting with Trump. So here we can see the national flags have already been hung on the walls along this entire street. This is a very rare thing that the Vietnamese government would do, is for some very special guests. And those flowers were also just hung up there. And we can also see that if we take a close look at the shops nearby, they are still open, and people are still, eating chickens, all kinds of spring rolls here in Vietnam. So it's a very lively scene here, but it's also very tight security. The Vietnamese government is trying to make sure that everything is safe. So we are having speculations, we are having some interesting shots, we are also waiting for some historic moments here in Hanoi to see the second handshake between US President Donald Trump and the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un right here in Hanoi. And one more thing I have to say is that Kim Jong Un's first day of official visit of Vietnam will only start on March the 1st, according to what the DPRK had said. So that will be the official start of the goodwill visit of the bilateral meetings between Kim Jong Un and the Vietnamese leaders.
And join us in the studio is my analyst friend Einar Tongan to have a breakdown of what is looking ahead for the meeting between Trump and Kim 6 months after their first summit in Singapore. There are different expectations from around the world, but Trump himself seems to have played down the expectations before he landed in Hanoi. What do you make when may come up with this?
Well, I think his main push will be on the only low-hanging fruit that's available, and that is a peace treaty. And I think this is his win on this. Donald Trump is very happy to be in Hanoi and not back in D.C. at this moment. But he's definitely looking for something he can bring back that talks about his promises, the idea that he can end the war that's been going on.
But the war has already ended.
It ended in an armistice. But that armistice still is basically, war has not been ceased. It just has been stalled. So South Korea wants a peace treaty. North Korea wants a peace treaty. All right, if that happens, there are a number of things that kind of fall on for that. For instance, the UN will go home.
But what will happen on the ground if there is a peace treaty signed between only the U.S. and DPRK?
Well, I don't think that can be done. It has to be a four-part treaty because China was part of...
You don't think there's going to be a peace treaty this time?
No. I think what he's going to talk about is bringing peace to the divided peninsula. I mean, this is custom-made for Donald Trump. He's going to say that, look, I'm bringing change. I'm bringing peace to this divided peninsula, and everyone should acknowledge what I have done. You should give me a Nobel Peace Prize.
But the problem is, the DPRK has been saying, we've been doing a lot. We've been freezing our nuclear tests, missile tests. We've been sending back your war heroes, the remains of the war heroes. What have you provided in return?
Well, Donald Trump is in a difficult situation there because he can't really provide very much because he's railed against every other president that has struck a deal with North Korea, given them aid, only to see it kind of fall apart. Not always at the solely at the DPRK's feet. They have not. There were times when they had transitions in presidents, especially to the Bush, where he was not as keen on what was signed by his predecessor and therefore kind of went back on it, and it slowed things down. So you have a situation where there's a huge trust deficit on both sides. The question is, how do they overcome it? Now, the first step, baby step, though it may be, would be a peace treaty.
About the denuclearization itself, what do you think will come out of this? More specific details about how to get nuke out of Korean Peninsula.
Well, I don't think you're going to...
More clarity this time, you think?
No, there can't be any more clarity because the positions are pretty much fixed. The DPRK cannot, I mean, from a strategic point, give up their nukes because it's their only leverage. And they look at Saddam Hussein and a lot of other areas and they say the moment your teeth are taken, you will be killed. So Donald Trump is saying, oh, no, look at Vietnam. But I don't think that Vietnam, who was victorious over the U.S. and was able to push the U.S. out, is the same. And
Vietnam doesn't have the nuclear weapons.
They don't have nuclear weapons, and that's not even on the table. They pursued a more economic bent in their things. And the question is, how much does Kim want to change his country in terms of economics, and how willing is Trump to give something? I don't think...
What?
And the question is what? I mean, he's hemmed in. The U.S. has imposed unilateral sanctions on North Korea. Those could be easily lifted because the UN sanctions are still in place, and he could claim, look, I'm just trying to help things along. We've signed a peace treaty, therefore we don't have to be as hard line. But this definition, you're absolutely right, of what denuclearization really is going to not be settled here.
That is a hard question indeed. And we have a team in Hanoi covering the summit from Hanoi. And for that, let's cross over to my colleague Tian Wei, who's been following this. Tian Wei?
Thank you very much, Zoe. We've been hearing from the Beijing studio a lot of discussions about what to happen. And in fact, there are a lot of things going on and happening right now in Hanoi. In the next 1 hour from now, we're going to see a lot of things unwrapping from here. First of all, the two leaders coming from the U.S. and the DPRK are likely to leave their hotel. They're respectively staying at the JW Marriott and Melia Hotel. They're going to leave their hotel and heading toward what many consider as a social dinner. Before the social dinner happens, they are going to greet one another, and they're also likely to make what some consider a brief statement to the public. We do not know exactly how long will those process be, but certainly CGTN is here, a big strong team here in Hanoi, bringing you all the latest as it happens. For now, let me go to my correspondent, Tony Chung, who is traveling here in Hanoi. Tony is here helping us to understand the mood on the ground. In fact, he is right there in front of the Metropole Hotel. Tony, take it from here.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this is where those two leaders are expected to come in about 30 minutes or so. About 5 minutes ago, these roads, which were being closed off and watched quite closely by security, everybody suddenly surged forward. So there's a sort of feeling of anticipation here. Lots of people very excited to get a view of the motorcade. I'm not sure what we'll actually see. If you look over the tops of the heads here, just down the road, you can see the entrance to the Metropole Hotel. That has been cleared off. A lot of security outside there. We're expecting Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un to arrive, as I said, at about 6:30. They will have an opportunity to sit down, we think, for 20 minutes for a brief one-on-one meeting. The first meeting they're going to have of this summit, and then they're going to get ahead with that dinner. It will be a fairly intimate dinner, only 6 guests, 3 from each side. So again, an opportunity to talk. We don't know what issues are going to be discussed. A fairly elaborate menu of Vietnamese-inspired food from the Metropole Hotel here. But again, everyone here waiting with much anticipation for that first official meeting between these two leaders of this summit, which is going to take place anytime soon. Now back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Tony. As we can see from some of the live feed in the studio right in front of the JW Marriott, where President Trump is staying. In fact, there's an entourage already leaving the hotel. Now, we are not very clear whether President Trump is in that entourage for now, but certainly we're going to get to our viewers once we know it. He is going to what we believe as the Metropole Hotel, where the meeting is going to take place, and also a social dinner between the U.S. and the DPRK leader. Having said that, though, Tony, let me get back to you. You know, there's a lot of things going on between the first summit and right now. And yet what we are seeing in the next 2 days, once again, it's going to be celebrity diplomacy in a way, isn't it, Tony?
Hi, Tim. Well, I'm afraid I lost your question there, but things here are certainly getting very excited. Of course, this is a very different kind of meeting from the ones we've seen in the past, well, with the exception of the Singapore meeting. But as a journalist based in Beijing 10 years ago, I followed quite closely the six-party talks, which was the process designed to look at Korean denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula in the past. And that was a very different process from this. Rather staid meetings in Beijing, 6 parties involved, a lot of technicians, a lot less pressure. Well, you can see here from the crowds, this process is a lot more star power. It's getting a lot more attention. But one wonders if perhaps this does put an awful lot of pressure. You heard from the studio guest in Beijing the fact that I think at this stage people are not desperately optimistic that that there can be a significant move forward in the denuclearization process. Well, we've seen Donald Trump. Depends whether you agree with him or not, but he's certainly a charismatic president. He's brought a lot of sort of star power to this process. But what substance we're actually going to see over the next 24 hours? Well, at this stage, I think no one's really sure. Now back to you.
Tony Chung, our correspondent, now right in front of the Metropole Hotel. As you can see in the background where Tony was talking, there's a huge crowd. Of course, the road has been blocked. Even around our special studio, we are now in a very important place in Hanoi, in which some of the major roads of the city actually interact with one another. And we are right in front of the road that has been totally blocked. Later, you're going to see maybe some siren sounds or so coming from this area. Obviously, that means the entourage are leaving their hotel, going to the place where they're supposed to meet. And we're going to get back to you about all those important information as it happens. Now, Trump and Kim may be the ones getting all the headlines, but behind the scenes, trusted diplomatic aides and experts have been paving the ground. Take a look.
Leading the DPRK's team is Pyongyang's chief negotiator Kim Jong-chol, who finalized agreements for the Vietnam meeting. He is Kim Jong Un's top official in charge of relations with South Korea. Lee Yong-ho is foreign minister and a veteran diplomat. He has a diplomatic career spanning more than 30 years and headed the DPRK's delegation at the six-party talks between 2003 and 2007. Kim Hyok-chol is the new counterpart to U.S. Special Representative for the DPRK, Stephen Biegun. On the U.S. side, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State and Trump's intermediary with Pyongyang, is likely to lead the team. He says the U.S. still considers the DPRK to be a nuclear threat. John Bolton is Trump's hawkish national security advisor. He has a track record of strong statements on key issues, including the DPRK. Stephen Biegun is a former Ford executive now acting as the U.S. Special Representative for DPRK. He's visited the DPRK capital, Pyongyang, and has been outspoken about what Trump wants out of a deal.
Certainly, a lot of groundwork has been done, and yet needs to be still hammered out between the two sides, between the DPRK and the United States. That's what people expect when the summit happens. We'll see whether they will be able to fulfill all our expectations. Following the White House press corps, we have Jessica Stone with us in Hanoi as well. Jessica, you want to tell me about anything that you have right now on hand about what's likely to happen, whether timeline or the kinds of discussions or the kinds of exposure the press will be able to have when the two leaders meet, the first time since last year's Singapore summit?
That's right. We are currently waiting for U.S. President Donald Trump to arrive at the Sofitel Legend Metropole Hotel, which of course may indeed get to live up to its name of legend if all goes well this evening. The president is expecting to have the 20-minute meeting one-on-one with Kim Jong Un, the leader of the DPRK, and as you mentioned earlier, there will then be a dinner between, interestingly, Mike Pompeo will be attending on behalf of the United States along with the U.S. President, and Mick Mulvaney, a name that many of our viewers may not have heard, who is the newer Chief of Staff. On the other side, we understand from the White House that the DPRK will be bringing Kim Young-chol and the Foreign Minister, Mr. Ri Yong-ho. It strikes me as that is very important to note, that these two additional aides of the leaders are not exactly equivalent in stature and in station in terms of their importance in the negotiations. I had expected to see attending with Mike Pompeo and President Trump, for example, perhaps the special representative to the DPRK, Steve Biegun, who's been leading a lot of the negotiations, the working level talks, or perhaps the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. We, in fact, have not seen John Bolton publicly since he touched down in Hanoi early yesterday morning. And behind the scenes, we are not being given access to these officials, which typically we are. So it's very interesting to see that Mick Mulvaney will be at the table. This is someone with no foreign policy experience, a previous congressman, and a fiscal hawk in the U.S. government, will be for the first time in the room with DPRK officials on behalf of the U.S. government. So I think that's very important to note. You know, on the flip side, Tianwei, we obviously have a very strong personal chemistry between these two leaders, and we've often heard Donald Trump talk about the, quote, love letters that he's received from Kim Jong Un. We'll have to see if the chemistry is visible in the video that we get back from their initial meeting. They will have an initial meeting before, like a public meeting, I should say. Perhaps some pleasantries. We're not expecting a big announcement, but after that, as I say, there's a 20-minute one-on-one meeting, and we're not even sure if there are any aides in that meeting to give us any type of readout or information. Of course, this is typically the pattern for this president, that he likes to do things on his own without a lot of supervision, particularly at this level. Tianwei.
Jessica, earlier you and I were talking on the phone, and you were telling me there was supposed to be some kinds of press opportunity between the Secretary of State and the media, and that was eventually canceled for the afternoon in Hanoi. We're going to see what's going to happen later as things evolve and also unwrap. Having said that, though, it is not just the United States and DPRK that is looking at what's going to happen in the next 24 hours, but also many of those parties involved earlier in the six-party talks. Now, earlier you talk about China and some of the other players. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in a press opportunity in China, he's talking about China's expectation for the second round of the summit. He's talking about, and here I'm translating from Chinese into English, he hopes there will be real steps forward toward the denuclearization and the establishment of the Peninsula Peace Mechanism. That's what the quote coming from Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi today, earlier, expecting the second summit. Having said that, though, Jessica, I still need to invite your insight on some other issues. And I mean, everybody knows what's going on now in Hanoi is going to have a split of screen with what's going on in Washington for the current White House. Now, what exactly is going on, and how is likely to be the proportion these two stories are going at the same time?
Well, yeah, there's a very large story emerging in the U.S. right now with the president's former personal attorney scheduled to testify in front of the U.S. Congress tomorrow morning, just hours before the U.S. president goes into a negotiating room with Kim Jong Un. And so the timing here of his testimony, which has already been publicly released, has already caught the eye, even 12 hours away and many, many miles away of the U.S. president. He was tweeting earlier about the allegations that his personal attorney will make regarding the Russia probe and the allegations of collusion against him, calling it false reporting. Also, he, excuse me, criticizing the media in that case, but making many accusations via Twitter against Michael Cohen, saying that he had been disbarred from the Supreme Court, that he is using a crooked lawyer, and that he's just doing this to reduce his prison time. He has taken a plea, but this is definitely going to be a distraction for the U.S. president as he goes into that negotiating room with Kim Jong Un. So we've seen the president react to that and a couple of other headlines from the U.S., and most recently he issued a tweet at about 4:47 local time saying, "All false reporting, guessing on my intentions with respect to North Korea. Kim Jong Un and I will try very hard to work something out on denuclearization and then making North Korea an economic powerhouse. I believe that China, Russia, Japan, and South Korea will be very helpful." So there he seems to have gotten back on point ahead of his meetings with Kim Jong Un. But it's very important, of course, and all eyes are watching on whether he can continue to keep that focus on a very important set of negotiations in this second summit. Tianwei?
Wow, thank you very much, Jessica Stone, our very own, coming for us in Hanoi. Now, a lot of things are going on, but what is very important is what's likely to happen when the leaders of the United States and DPRK are meeting with one another. I can hear already very clearly in the background the siren sound. Obviously, the entourage of both sides are passing through where our street is right now in downtown Hanoi. Now, we are situated in the old quarter of Hanoi, and we can have maybe some live signals getting to you how things are evolving right now. Very sharp siren sound, as you can hear from the background. Both of the entourages are heading what we believe as the Metropole Hotel. The Metropole Hotel is also a very luxurious hotel in the old quarter of the city of Hanoi. And it is also believed as a very much a high-end hotel. Obviously, all things are ready from the Vietnamese part when it comes to preparations for these two to meet. And just to line up for our viewers around the world, once again, we're going to see likely the arrival of the leaders coming from the DPRK and the United States. They are, according to the original plan, likely to greet one another. We do not know whether that will be with live streams. However, we will get that to you when it happens. Meanwhile, after they greet one another, they are likely to also talk a little bit, what they call as brief statements. Now, what they're going to say and how long those statements are going to be, we do not know, but we will get to you as well. After that, the plan is that they are going into what something called a social dinner. Okay, so we do not know what is likely to be said, but certainly a lot to expect. Now, back to Beijing, Zhou Yue.
All right, thank you, Tianwei, for your reporting from our Hanoi studio. Obviously, this is going to be a very important summit for both sides. And we got to follow up on the latest progress in Hanoi about the second summit between Kim and Trump. Before that, of course, they will meet tonight for a social dinner and one-on-one. And it will be the first time since they last met in Singapore in June. But nothing actually happened from both the North Korean side and American side in terms of denuclearization. Has anything happened substantial?
Well, the most important thing is they're not threatening to throw bombs at each other. I mean, go back in time, everyone was extremely concerned that there was going to be an outbreak of nuclear war. Or some sort of conventional war. So at this point, it's better to be talking than throwing bombs.
But that's the case before their first summit.
I know, but yes, but quite frankly, yes. And everyone is saying that that was a nothing burger. That they met, there were a lot of nice words, but there was actually no action. There was no definition of denuclearization. There was no timetable. All right, there was no planned peace process or anything like that. So, I mean, people took it as an exercise in PR, and quite frankly, a lot of people think that DPRK won that because a small country sitting down with the most powerful man on earth.
When Mike Pompeo, American Secretary of State, visited Pyongyang, he was actually meeting Kim Jong Un, saying that Kim Jong Un wants to get rid of nuclear weapons. The only problem is how and what will
happen. Yeah, because quite frankly, the question is one. I mean, Kim has said, oh yes, we'll denuclearize, but he's also hinted that what that means is that the U.S. has to denuclearize, that they have to pull back their troops, that they have to pull out all their nuclear deterrent from not only South Korea, but anywhere within their region.
So you're saying that this time around, both sides will clarify what denuclearization means. Does it mean just that North get rid of their own nuclear program, or does it mean the Americans have to withdraw their nuclear capabilities from Korea?
I think you should take your hint from what Donald Trump said just shortly before he went over. As long as they're not testing or firing rockets, it's okay.
Okay, you're watching the motorcades of, I believe this is the American president's motorcade coming to the venue of the meeting in Metropole Hotel. This is going to be a social dinner, as my colleague Tian Wen explained. This is the North Korean motorcade coming on the street of Hanoi and going to the meeting place to attend the social dinner between President Trump and Chairman Kim. We will keep you posted on what is happening on the streets in Hanoi and what is inside the Metropole Hotel in Hanoi. Let's come back to our talks, Einar. So if there is no definition, clear definition of what denuclearization means, how can they get there? Well, the two leaders, when they meet this time, they will have an agreement, an announcement on what exactly is denuclearization.
No, I don't think so. I think there'll be an outline of a roadmap. And what they'll say is that first we have to be at peace, and then no more firing rockets, and then we're going to sit down and start talking about
that's already the case. No firing of rockets and missile tests.
There's no peace. There's no peace treaty. The reality is that China, at minimum, China, North, South Korea, and the U.S. have to be part of that because they were the ones who signed the armistice, and the treaty would replace the armistice. And you heard earlier the references by the Trump team to also including Russia and Japan. So that's the six-party talks. It makes sense from an overall point of view, but when Trump generally says he expects them to be helpful, it sounds to me like he's going to say, I'll declare peace and you guys pay for whatever the North Koreans want in terms of aid. I don't know that Russia is going to be anxious to do that, but maybe China and South Korea would help. Japan, I don't think so.
And so that peace regime or peace mechanism has to take place before denuclearization talks.
Oh, yeah, I think that was the plan all the way along. I mean, Trump initially said no peace, no relaxation of any of the sanctions and things like that until they denuclearize. Now he seems to be softening on that. I think he's looking for a definite PR win where he can say that he brought peace to this continent and then say we have a roadmap to denuclearization. But given the circumstances, it's almost impossible to see how you could come up with a definition at this point that both sides would be comfortable with.
All right. Well, Kim and Trump's first summit was actually held in Singapore last June, and the two leaders back then released a joint statement following their first meeting. Well, there were four key takeaways. One, both sides would look to establish new relations according to the desire of their respective peoples. Two, they would work to build lasting and stable peace on the Korean Peninsula. And three, the DPRK said it was committed to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And four, it also agreed to recover and repatriate the remains of soldiers from the Korean War. Well, let's go live to the Hanoi scene right now. This is the DPRK delegation arriving at the hotel where they're supposed to have a social dinner with the American delegation and a one-on-one between Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump. Chairman Kim actually traveled through China to arrive at Vietnam. He spent 2.5 days traveling on this train to get to the port city of Don Don, and then was picked up by a motorcade to arrive in Hanoi. And this is the first time for the young DPRK leader to visit Vietnam. Vietnam, of course, enjoyed friendly relations with the DPRK back in the 1950s and 60s. His grandfather, Kim Jong Un, visited Vietnam back then to meet Ho Chi Minh in that time frame. And now his grandson, Kim Jong Un, is visiting Vietnam. So apart from the Trump-Kim summit, Kim will also meet with Vietnamese leaders. And the speculation is that the DPRK leader will try to compare notes on how to develop economy, because both Vietnam and the DPRK are socialist countries. And the DPRK can learn from Vietnam on how to develop their own economy. This is, of course, one of the main priorities for the DPRK and the young leader. So Tianwei, you are covering this from Hanoi. What have you seen, and what are the talks about tonight's social dinner, and what is going to be the one-on-one meeting all about?
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, while the live streaming is playing out on the screen, you can see Metropole Hotel. That is where the two leaders, DPRK leader Kim Jong Un and also U.S. President Donald Trump, going to meet. And now it seems from all the videos we have access to, both sides have arrived. President Trump was earlier in the video. Obviously, his entourage is leaving his hotel toward the Metropole, and now we just saw some videos suggesting the DPRK leader, Chairman Kim, arrived with his security guards running around toward the hotel. Obviously, you can see that is the prelude usually when the Chairman Kim arrives, and it is the Metropole Hotel that where the two leaders are going to greet. Meanwhile, make some brief statement and have a social one-on-one dinner. We also have from here in the city of Hanoi some live streaming of videos coming from the local TV, which suggests the setup of the Metropole Hotel and how is it compared to the Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island in Singapore. In fact, almost exactly the same. The flags lined up in an open space in which likely the two leaders going to shake hands with one another, and certainly there are pool reporters and video cameras over there in order to record this very important moment. Now, what you have on the screen now is still the outside of the Metropole Hotel. Vietnam, the city of Hanoi, is 100% ready, as we have been talking to them earlier during the past few days about the security situations and also about the preparations. Now, the Metropole Hotel is a luxury hotel that has a long tradition in the old quarter of the city of Hanoi. And as we are talking, different entourage coming from the two sides are arriving. We do not know exactly what exactly is a social dinner, the interpretation of it, but certainly, as you could imagine, during a dinner of about 1 hour and a half, likely there is a lot to be discussed. Earlier, our reporter also briefed us about who are likely to be in that social dinner. Now you are seeing right now on the screen the setup inside the Metropole Hotel where the two leaders are going to meet and make the press and the world seen. Since last year, June the 12th, 2018, the first summit, a lot happened, and people are waiting for the second summit as to what's likely to evolve from here. Many suspect that there should be more substance about the second summit. We'll see how the mood is. Usually when they meet one another, one could almost tell whether there's much more to be discussed from the way that they greet one another, they smile to each other, and the way they face the press. Now, what you're seeing are live feed coming from the Metropole Hotel. That's exactly the place where the U.S. President Donald Trump and DPRK leader Kim Jong Un to meet. This is their first meeting since June 2018. Outside, you can see the security and also the cars carrying the two entourages waiting right there at the gate of the Metropole Hotel. What we are also expecting are what some of the things done since the first summit. For example, the interactions between the DPRK and the United States, and also the important roles by other players in this process, and whether they're going to have a real fruit for the second summit. We are expecting that moment.
Sure, that
flags
will be
everywhere in Hanoi.
Okay, thank you so much,
And
Tian
for
Wei.
now, let me go back to you, Zhou Yue.
Thank you, Tian Wei. We look forward to more reporting from Hanoi. Obviously, that will be a big question. What kind of results will bear out of the second summit? And since the two leaders' first meeting last June, the two sides have failed to reach to a consensus on multiple issues. Here is a look at what are the key sticking points.
And I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization, and I think you'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy.
The U.S. president is upbeat before his second big meeting with the DPRK leader, but few analysts share the same optimism. They believe progress has been slow in the denuclearization talks. Trump and Kim met in June last year in Singapore and agreed in principle to work towards the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Though the rhetoric has cooled, the path to permanent peace remains a rocky one. There are three key sticking points that have stalled the current round of negotiations. First is the process of denuclearization. The DPRK believes the U.S. must take corresponding measures to the ones it has taken. It says as proof of its intentions, the dismantling of nuclear testing site and no new nuclear missile tests. But U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stressed complete and verifiable denuclearization before economic sanctions can be eased. Though recently the U.S. has indicated that it may take some corresponding steps to resolve the impasse. Pyongyang also wants the U.S. to agree to an official end to the Korean War and guarantee the security of Kim's regime, but Washington insists it should first sign a disarmament deal. Experts say the United States is reluctant as a formal end to war would undermine the rationale for stationing 28,000 American troops in South Korea. This leads to the third and possibly the most contentious part, the definition of denuclearization. For Pyongyang, it means reciprocal steps to get rid of nuclear weapons. This includes requiring the U.S. to remove its nuclear umbrella from the peninsula. But for many in Washington, it means...
This is the meeting between Trump and Kim inside the hotel, the second meeting since their last meeting in June last year in Singapore.
Chip, I think they're going to be very successful. We look forward to it. We don't do it.
Have you walked back at all on denuclearization in North Korea?
No.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Mr. President, are you going to declare an end to the Korean War, sir? We'll see. We'll be seeing. Thank you. Thank you all very much. You're coming back.
There's some short conversations between President Trump and the press. All smiling faces on Kim and Trump. They are taking a photo in front of the flags of the United States and the DPRK. This is their second meeting since last June. And Tian Wei, they have just met inside the hotel, and this is their first meeting since last June.
That's right.
What is next then?
Well, this is already quite a historical moment. As you can see, the two are already quite familiar with one another since the first summit, the way they stand and the way they greet one another. And this is a very different setup
well, there's
for
a
now,
messy photography there
because
this is live, of course. We understand that sometimes the signals are not stable. But we know that Trump and Kim have already met in Hanoi. This is their second meeting since their meeting in Singapore last June. And they will attend a dinner tonight, and The dinners will be attended by both sides, 4 on one side and 4 on the other side. Donald Trump, President of the United States, His Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, and also Mr. Mick Mulvaney, Assistant to the President and Acting Chief of Staff, and also interpreter. That's 4 persons on this side. And on the other side is, of course, Mr. Kim Jong Un, and he's Vice Chairman of Central Committee of Workers' Party. That's Mr. Kim Yong-cho and Mr. Ri Yong-ho. That's his Foreign Affairs Minister. In addition, there is an interpreter. So 4 persons on each side for the dinner tonight. What they will be talking about tonight, because this is not the official meeting, the summit as we speak, for tomorrow. They just get to know each other better, or they will have some exchange of key information?
Well, with Donald Trump, he's very big about the art of the deal. And a lot of that is his commanding presence. I mean, he's right. He has a lot of charisma. He's used to going into tough situations.
He looked very confident.
Well, I mean, maybe you thought he was confident. I think they looked a little bit awkward.
But there were some give and takes between him and the press. He said, we'll see, we'll see. That means...
Well, he always says that. So generally, if he has something very positive, he's not shy about saying good things are going to happen. If you look at his statements coming up to this, he was very euphoric. This is a big opportunity. They're going to see this as a big opportunity, and they're going to meet us along the way. And so this is very different. I noticed that Kim he smiled briefly, but otherwise he did not look very comfortable.
Kim was a little more tense than Trump.
Well, I don't know. Trump was not smiling. He was standing there very stiffly, and he was not smiling at all. Only just briefly once, he put his hand on Kim's shoulder. But if you if you compare the pictures to where they were last time, they were much closer together. This time they were a little further apart. Now, you can't put too much on that, but it's clear that he wants to do it. Now, my understanding is from the White House press secretary is that the 2 of them and their interpreters will have a 20-minute, or it's scheduled for 20-minute conversation. Trump loves this. This is really one-on-one with their interpreters. Will there be a transcript? We don't know. But
or will it overrun the 20-minute that they...
Or whether it overrun. A lot will depend on how it's going. But this is really where Trump thinks he shines. It's his ability to craft a deal, to use his personality.
Let's try to go live again. This is sitting down. They have a short conversation.
우리가 가는 길을 막으려고 했지만 우리는 그것들을 다 빼버리고 극복하고 해서 다시 마주 걸어서 261일 만에 여기 하노이까지 걸어왔습니다.
So during that 261 days since we last met, there have been some misunderstandings. There have been, these eyes from the world who are misunderstanding our situation. And there was some hostility that still remained from the very, very past period, that from the outside. But however, we have been able to overcome all those obstacles. And here we are today, after 261 days in Hanoi.
그 기간이 때문에 생각해보면 좀 어느 때보다도 많은 그 고민과 노력 그리고 그 인내가 필요했던 그런 기간이었던 것 같습니다.
I truly believe that those 261 days were the days during which a lot of painstaking efforts were necessary and also a lot of patience were needed.
그래서 우리는 오늘 여기서 이렇게 만났습니다. 이번에 보다 더 모든 사람들이 반기는 그런 훌륭한 결과가 만들어질 거라고 확신하고 또 그렇게 되기 위해서 최선을 다하겠습니다.
But here we are today, sitting next to each other, and that gives us a hope that we will be successful this time, and I will really try to make that happen.
Thank you very much. That's really nice. Well, I wanted to say it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together in really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us. And it's great to be with you. We had a very successful first summit. I felt it was very successful. And some people would like to see it go quicker. I'm satisfied, you're satisfied. We want to be happy with what we're doing. But I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 김정은 위원장님 다시 만나게 되어서 영광입니다. 그리고 또 오늘 같이 하게 되어서 또 매우 기쁩니다. 우리가 베트남에서 만났습니다. 베트남이 아주 우리를 굉장히 환영을 하고 레드카펫을 깐 것처럼 그렇게 환영하고 있습니다. 우리는 첫 번째 그 정상회담을 굉장히 성공적으로 마쳤습니다. 어떤 사람들은 우리의 어떤 진전이 더 빨리 갔으면 하고 그렇게 원하는 사람도 있지만 내가 보기에는 우리가 상당히 잘하고 있고 또 첫 번째 그 정상회담이 굉장히 성공적이었습니다. 이번 회담도 첫 번째 것과 같은 성공 또는 아니면 더 성공하기를 바라고 있습니다. 그리고 우리는 아마 이번에 더 많은 진전을 이룰 것 같습니다.
And as I've said many times, and I say it to the press, I say it to anybody that wants to listen, I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen. And we will help it to happen.
우리 그 여러 번 내가 얘기를 했고 또 언론들한테도 제가 여러 번 했습니다만은 저는 조선이 엄청난 경제적인 잠재력을 가지고 있다라고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 큰 성공을 이룰 거로 생각합니다. 위대한 지도자 밑에서 아주 잘할 거로 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 그러한 성공을 저는 계속 보게 되기를 기대하고 있습니다.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And we're going to go have dinner. And then we have some big meetings scheduled for tomorrow. And we'll see you, I guess, at a news conference at some point during the day. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, do you have any reaction to Michael Cohen, his testimony?
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
That's another handshake, another meeting between Kim and Trump. Kim mentioned patience, and Trump said there is progress since their first meeting. There was some exchange of pleasantries, and they will continue their dinner, social dinner, after this meeting. Can we go over to this process and hand it over to my colleague Tianwei? Tianwei, you've been observing their meeting and their session with the press. What do you make of their second meeting?
So as you can notice from the interaction between the two leaders, Chairman Kim's is relatively shorter, while President Trump's is a bit longer if you look at the length of their conversation. And also from President Trump, you could see very clearly that he is trying to indicate once again the first summit was a great success, and the United States is here to help make the DPRK's economy great, to help make the DPRK leader a great leader. At that time, you could see the reaction coming on the face of the DPRK leader, Chairman Kim. He was listening quite attentively, but at the same time smiled in a very unique way. And of course, eventually he nodded his head and politely shook hands with the US president. Now, if you listen to the words, those are certainly what we have heard already before. However, if you look at the interactions and the way people look at each other between the two of them and the ambience, the chemistry between these two leaders, certainly you could tell there is much more story happened since the first summit. First of all, there's one thing very important that he said, President Trump said, that the relationship is doing very well. He said some people did not think the first summit was a success, but this one actually is, according to him. Mm-hmm. And he also said, let's enjoy this opportunity and also to be able to have dinner and the plan for tomorrow. Many are looking forward to what they are likely to interact with one another and what's likely to be the agenda for tomorrow. Of course, the CGTN will bring to you. Zhou Yue, for now, I will go back to you, but also I'm here in Hanoi.
I want to ask you one question, Tianwei.
Okay,
do you think they are under more pressure this time around because they need to deliver on substance rather than just last time they just had a historic meeting?
Absolutely. That's what many scholars and also insiders have been trying to suggest. Last time, remember, you and I were also sitting in the studio in Beijing and also in Singapore. You heard in the statement that there are several things going on. There's a so-called new peace relations and also security guarantee, the denuclearization and recovery of the soldier remains, and also follow up with all of the negotiations. Some of these points made last year actually can be, in a way said, partially done. For example, the return of the remains of the U.S. soldier to the United States by the DPRK. But many of the most difficult part about denuclearization, what is the exact plan, how two sides will be able to guarantee the other side will take the step, while at the same time have your own actions, and at the same time, peace treaty. The peace treaty, as mentioned in our earlier studio discussion in Beijing, is not something that the U.S. and the DPRK will be handled alone, but rather the other players, South Korea and China as well. But the establishment of a peace mechanism, that certainly should be discussed and the details should be revealed. Now you see that live video coming, you see that video once again being played on the screen. That is another historical moment. However, whether there are historical content to go with it, it's a big question mark. That will only be answered on the 28th, tomorrow.
Well, so, hopefully they can deliver an answer to that. Now we cross over to reporters. We've been covering this from Seoul and from Pyongyang. Let's go first to our reporter, Raphael Wober in Pyongyang. Raphael, could you please outline for us what are Pyongyang's needs for the second Kim-Trump summit? Because last time they considered progress. They have met President Trump, the U.S. president, but there is no sanction relief yet.
From the Pyongyang point of view, for the DPRK, I think it's really impossible to underestimate, or I mean, we cannot overemphasize the concern which the DPRK feels for improving an overall improvement in relations between it and the US. So from the DPRK point of view, this is not just about denuclearization, but what the DPRK considers to be really historic moment where 70 years or so of hostility will be turned into a new relationship. And that means that the DPRK sees any move from the US as very important still. So it's not just a question of the nuts and bolts of denuclearization. What the DPRK first and foremost wants to see is clear steps from the US to create an atmosphere of trust and help this new relationship start to develop. And of course, as well as that, as your correspondents have mentioned, the DPRK's concern about an end of the Korean War, a formal end to the Korean War, whether it's first of all a declaration made with the US to be followed by a full formal armistice, bringing in other powers, but certainly some significant movement to create what was called in that Singapore declaration a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And then of course there are the concerns about sanctions. But I think overall, one thing to me here in Pyongyang that's been very interesting today is a very small point, but I think it does have some relevance, that in one of the reports in DPRK state media about the build-up to the summit, it was reporting about the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un after his arrival in Hanoi having a briefing from his working level negotiation team who've been there in country for the past few days talking to the Americans, that the report here referred to the briefing as being about the plans for a successful second summit. And I think that just that word successful, both in English and in the original Korean here, is actually very important, that the DPRK state media would come out and refer to the summit in that way on just the day that it's starting, that the first meeting is happening. So I think overall the DPRK is trying to emphasize its concerns about a new relationship with the US from which all will follow if that relationship can be built.
Well, that's important. Call it successful before it even happens. Don't go away. We have this story to run. This is about DPRK's economy. The DPRK has begun paying more attention to economic development. And our own Dong Haitao went to Pyongyang to see how things are going on that front.
In April of last year, political leaders in the DPRK announced a new strategic focus on building the economy. Nuclear tests and ballistic missile launches have stopped, and more resources were put into development. Last year, 70% of the public activities leader Kim Jong Un participated in were related to economic and foreign affairs. Kim has conducted inspections throughout the country, learning more about the work being done at factories, rural areas, construction sites, and other workplaces. Beginning last year, Pyongyang has seen more development with new high-rises and landmark buildings. The number of cars on the road has increased, and more people are taking taxis in the capital city. People are staying out later, and many hotels have extended their business hours. Pyongyang has become more lively at night, with residents going out to restaurants. And shopping malls are busier too, with a constant stream of people checking out what's on the shelves.
现在在朝鲜的超市、商店和商场，物资供应明显比以前更加丰富，不仅种类齐全，而且质地也足够新鲜。现在在周末的时候，很多朝鲜民众会一家老小齐上阵，到商场去购物血拼。可以说，朝鲜集中一切力量进行经济建设的新战略路线已经初见成效。央视记者平壤报道。
Let's go back to Rafael again. Rafael, as we know, the Singapore summit ended with a promise to work towards complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But the rationale is that that will improve North Korean economy greatly. So what kind of expectations do North Koreans have about having a better economy because of the denuclearization?
I don't think that that those two concepts are explicitly or overtly linked here, although there is some acknowledgement of the effect, or there's been a lot of acknowledgement of the effect that sanctions have as a brake on economic development here. But I think, to put it into context, the economic development story here really goes back a number of years. 2012 was the start of what is called here new economic management methods. Sorry, and I think that those were really trialed starting in 2012. New measures to adjust the way that people are able to do business here, or farmers are able to farm their land and use their crops. And then in 2016 at a landmark party congress here, those plans were formalized as a kind of a new 5-year economic plan. So we're now into the 3rd year of that, and I think that certainly coming and going from Pyongyang over the past 7 years, well, for more than a decade, certainly in the past 7 years, it has been very noticeable, not only in Pyongyang but elsewhere in the country, the new emphasis on economic development. As your correspondent mentioned, last April that was renewed with an important party meeting. Overall, I'd say that the DPRK definitely sets its priority now as economic development, and it doesn't like to link that together with the denuclearization or the talks with the US. It wants to insist, the slogans here insisting that economic development will come as a result of self-reliance. However, at the same time, over the past months in particular, there have been more expressions from the DPRK in state media and official statements about concerns and displeasure with the effects of sanctions. And I think that the DPRK also has expressed its interest in restarting the inter-Korean economic projects like the Kaesong Industrial Zone, which has been stopped now since 2017, and also the joint tourism project at Mount Kumgang, which has been stopped since 2008. I think that these things are something where the DPRK has felt that sanctions are standing in the way, and it wants to see those as part of its economic development.
But how sanctions are felt, how painful is it for North Koreans? How desperate are they wanting to go back to the Kaesong Industrial Park?
Overall, what officials here in the DPRK used to say about sanctions, this is going back years and years. I can remember the first time hearing this probably in 2002. what DPRK officials used to say always was that they've lived with various kinds of sanctions for decades. This goes back to the Korean War time, and it doesn't make any difference to them. However, what's happened since the really extra stringent sanctions put in place in 2016 and 2017 is that the DPRK has officially come out with more expressions of protest and its concerns about the deep effects of these sanctions on the economy here. And I think that that is something which the DPRK has said, and in particular, for example, it was mentioned in the DPRK leader's speech at the beginning of this year, as well as in foreign ministry statements and commentaries last year, the DPRK's displeasure at this continuing sanctions. How much it affects the average person here is something that many foreign observers really want to try to understand, but is really very difficult to understand. There are plenty of examples where imports and other things are massively affected, banking transactions, access to the international financial system, but how it affects the average person is difficult to understand.
All right, thank you very much. Let's turn to Jack in Seoul, the other side of Para 38. Well, Jack, South Korea has reportedly sent dozens of officials to Hanoi to observe this. So what are South Koreans looking at, and what role is the South Korean government to bring this happen?
Well, President Moon Jae-in has sent more than 20 officials to Hanoi, including Lee Do-hoon, South Korea's chief nuclear negotiator. Unlike Trump and his team, he's a veteran at this. He was at the table during the six-party talks, and he is joining that team there. They've set up their own press center to very much be a part of what's going on. Now, they're not expected to directly join in the negotiations there, but Donald Trump has in the past called President Moon his chief negotiator. That is, when it comes to keeping those talks between Pyongyang and Washington on track, and he's also called South Korea the chief stakeholder. So even though the focus is really on Hanoi at the moment between the US and the DPRK, this is, of course, a triangular relationship, and South Korea is a very integral part of that. Now, those officials, of course, are also going to be keeping an ear on what's happening over there, reporting directly back to President Moon. There is a lot at stake here for South Korea. Like the DPRK, South Korea also pushing very hard for some kind of sanctions relief at the moment. Raphael mentioned some of those economic programs that Pyongyang wants. They're the same programs Seoul wants. So President Moon absolutely being wanting to be kept abreast of the progress. And President Trump has told him as soon as the talks are over, he will call President Moon. He'll be the first to be briefed. And of course, Kim Jong Un, as early as March, will come here to Seoul. Well, he's expected to come here to Seoul to also have yet another summit with President Moon to keep this three-way diplomacy going, to keep whatever momentum is made, if there is any momentum at this summit, on track.
Obviously, President Moon has invested a lot in this to keep this momentum going. So, Jack, what are South Koreans saying about their president's choice? Are they supportive of Moon's gestures?
There's a few people here who are very against this process. They tend to be the older generation. Some of them are also for it, but again, the older generation tends to be quite skeptical. They say they've been through this before, it hasn't come to much. Having said that, the majority of South Koreans are positive, they are optimistic. Even though Moon's polls have been falling slightly, they are hopeful that if not full denuclearization, at least stability can come out of this. One thing I've really noticed that has changed, if you were back a few years ago and the DPRK let off an atomic bomb, the whole world would be in panic. You'd talk to South Koreans and they'd say, oh, has it? You know, sorry, I didn't watch the news. They were just so tuned out to events across the DMZ. Everyone is very tuned in at the moment. Everybody is watching this. Everyone is interested. So there's this new level of public engagement no matter what they think about it. Now, many people want that economic cooperation that Pyongyang and Seoul are seeking. But what a lot of people would really like to see here is that other element. Everyone's talking about a peace agreement. That's probably a full peace treaty somewhere a long way down the track. But a formal end to the war, which is something quite different. That is something that some people expect could come from this summit, and that would be seen as a big breakthrough here in Seoul. In the heart of Seoul, a large memorial and museum for a war that is still not officially over. which is why it gets new exhibits every few years, like this South Korean patrol boat sunk during a fierce naval battle with the DPRK in 2002. 8 years later, another South Korean warship was allegedly torpedoed by a DPRK submarine. 46 crew members lost their lives. And there have been frequent, often fatal, exchanges of fire along the demilitarized zone. Pyongyang now wants a formal peace agreement to replace the armistice, essentially a ceasefire signed in 1953. Seoul feels the same, as does China, a signatory to the original truce.
China and North Korea, no problem. China and South Korea, no problem. We normalized our relationship. The thing is that there should be the peace agreement between North Korea and the United States.
Even Donald Trump seems to be on board, but that doesn't mean a deal will be easy. A peace agreement would need an accompanying political agreement.
That means that South Korean constitution is going to recognize North Korea as a state. So I think that not only bringing the peace into the Korean peninsula, there's going to be huge change in Korean politics.
Of course, Pyongyang would have to reciprocate.
The leadership in the Korean Workers' Party talks about completing the revolution and achieving the final victory. So unless there's some kind of political settlement that includes the Korean Workers' Party ceasing or terminating the revolution and declaring a willingness to coexist and peacefully coexist, then I think it's kind of dangerous.
Given the complexities, it's likely that any deal to emerge would be struck down the road, not at the upcoming Hanoi summit, as some predict. But if Washington does agree to a formal end to the war in return for something substantial from Pyongyang, like a complete halt to weapons production, then it could represent a game changer here on the Korean Peninsula in terms of politics, trust, and of course, a lasting peace. Jack Barton, CGTN, at the War Memorial in Seoul. Now, we have heard from President Moon Jae-in again today. He has simultaneously sounded optimistic while playing down expectations, saying that any deal, whether it's big or small, will be a good deal and it will be a step in the right direction.
Well, that's a very optimistic tone there. Thank you very much, Jack, for your reporting from South Korea. Let's talk to Anar again. So, Anar, do you think it is realistic to expect that the inter-Korean rapprochement, the momentum will keep going, no matter what comes out of this Trump-Kim summit in Hanoi?
Well, a lot of it will depend on Moon Jae-in. His tenure as head of South Korea is absolutely crucial to this process going forward. If there is a change, and there are some rumblings about his handling of the economy, they say you're putting too much time into this and not enough into the local economy. So if he stays in, they will continue to be very, very much all in.
And the South Korean people support what is going on between the two sides.
Well, it's not that they all support, but they're very interested. This has been really the first time in a long time where they, as Jack Barton said, people are standing up and taking notice. When you go to South Korea, if you go to Seoul, and you talk about North Korea, they really don't register very much. It says, oh, it's there, it's always been there. But now it seems that and I think a lot of it has to do with, if there is a formal end to the Korean War, it does recognize two states, and that is a psychological thing, especially for Koreans who are very nation proud.
Yeah, that will be a tone of peace and calm for many. Right, thank you very much, Einar. And you've been watching a special program on the second Kim-Trump summit in Hanoi. I'm Joe in Beijing. We'll take a short break and be right back. Some other news. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has rejected the resignation of Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. In a letter to the foreign minister, the Iranian president said he believes Zarif's resignation is against the country's interests.